I've always said that the key to immigration reform is border security. You'll recall the last major comprehensive effort this body made to reform our broken immigration system about 6 years ago fell apart because a number of my colleagues here claimed, with some justification, that our borders were not secure enough. And many of my colleagues claimed, justly or not, that the border was still too porous and that we'd be having the same debate 20 years later because of border controls, or the lack of those. People ask themselves, are our borders secure enough to ensure that we don't end up having the same debate 20 or 30 years down the line? And the answer for many of our colleagues, a lot of Americans, was no, they are not. That was then, this is now. 6 years later, a number of people will still argue, I guess, that our borders are not secure enough to even try to move forward with these reforms. I just disagree. When I hear our colleagues ask, are our borders more secure? I'm often reminded of a friend, Mr. President, who says when you ask him how he's doing, he says, compared to what? Compared to what? I'd suggest that maybe the right comparison is what our borders look like in 2007. Are our borders more secure today than they were then? Are they a lot more secure or just a little bit? I think they're a lot more secure. And how do I know? I have the privilege, Mr. Chairman, of chairing now the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. We held a number of hearings this year on border security. I think even more importantly, I've had the opportunity to visit our borders with Mexico and actually up on Canada, along with Senator John McCain, Congressman Michael McCall from Texas, Secretary Janet Napolitano. Met with all kinds of local officials, sheriffs, police, mayors, and other folks. But 3 years ago, I visited the California border. Early this year, again, Arizona and Texas, up in Michigan. My goal was to get a firsthand look at what is working, what is not, and what more we ought to do to secure the border further. And we can. Based on what I've seen, there's overwhelming success, though, that our borders are more secure than they've been, and probably ever been, and certainly more secure than they were in 2007. So the truth is, we spend more on border security each year, about $18 billion, according to a recent Migration Policy Institute report, $18 billion a year. We spend more on that than we spend on the rest of federal law enforcement activities combined. Just think about that for a moment. We spend more on border enforcement, border security, than we spend on the FBI, Drug Enforcement Administration, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, and the U.S. Marshals combined. Since 2000, the Border Patrol alone has more than doubled in size. Its funding has almost quadrupled. We have built more than 650 miles of fencing along the border. That's roughly a third of our Mexican border. It's not impossible. As I learned from my trips to the border, there is simply no one size-that-fits-all solution for securing our border. It really depends on the terrain, which varies widely along the border region. That's why we need to systematically identify the best technology that allows us to use our frontline agents, the Border Patrol, more effectively, gives them the tools they need, or they tell us they need to be successful. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this bill that we're debating is going to appropriate about $6.5 billion to continue to build on the progress we've made and achieve the ambitious goals it sets for the department. And that's good news. My goal is to make sure that much of this funding is devoted to these force multipliers that can help our boots on the ground work smarter, be more effective. Let me add, I don't think we need to micromanage the process. We don't need 535 congressional law enforcement officers, so to speak. Rather, we need to spell out the goals, the priorities for border and port security, which this bill does. We need to give the Department of Homeland Security the tools, the resources, flexibility it needs to get the job done, which this bill also does. Then we need to let DHS do its job while at the same time continue to provide responsible and robust oversight. Not just here from Washington, but along the border itself. And that's what I now do and what my Committee on Homeland Security attempts to do, and it's what my colleagues and I want to ensure we do as this bill is implemented strongly and effectively. Still, as strong as our border defenses have become, and despite how much stronger this bill will make them, we cannot defend our nation entirely at the border. One of our witnesses earlier this year, Mr. President, noted that We often look to our borders to solve problems that originate elsewhere. Or in other words, we're so preoccupied with the symptoms that we're missing the underlying causes, which can make finding a solution all the more difficult. We've got to address the root causes that are drawing people to our country illegally in order to fully secure our borders and ensure that we're not embroiled in the same debate again 20 years from now. I'm pleased to say that this bipartisan legislation addresses the root causes in a way that I believe is tough, is practical, and is fair.